The unseen guardian. The galaxy was filled with many strange and mysterious beings, but none as elusive as the Neuralians. Their kind had a unique ability, an evolutionary gift that allowed them to phase between dimensions, making them completely invisible to all known species. To the rest of the universe, they did not exist. For centuries, the Neuralians had used this ability to gather intelligence, manipulate events from the shadows, and remain undetected. No one had ever seen them. No one had ever caught them. And Caliph, one of the finest Neuralian scouts, believed it would always stay that way. But today, something felt wrong. Caliph was stationed on Outpost Theta, a human-run space station in the outer sector. She had been observing the humans for weeks, phasing through walls, listening to their conversations, and learning about their strange, chaotic ways. Humans were fascinating creatures, loud, unpredictable, and reckless. But most of all, they were completely unaware of her presence. At least, that's what she thought. As she moved through the station, her keen eyes scanned the crowd. The marketplace was bustling with activity. Humans shouting about food rations, engineers arguing over ship repairs, and traders exchanging strange goods. Caliph weaved between them effortlessly, unseen, untouched. And then she saw him. A man stood near the docking bay, casually leaning against a metal railing. His uniform suggested he was someone important. A commander, perhaps. His name tag read Jack Carter. He wasn't speaking to anyone, wasn't interacting with the crowd. Instead, his sharp blue eyes were scanning the area. Caliph almost ignored him. Just another human in a sea of faces, until he did something impossible. He looked directly at her. Her body froze. No, that's not possible. Humans couldn't see Neuralians. Their species existed in a different phase of reality. There was no way he could be looking at her, and yet Jack Carter's gaze was locked onto her exact position. She tested him. Slowly, she stepped to the left. Jack's eyes followed. She moved to the right. Jack's smirk widened. He knows. A chill ran down Caliph's spine. She had spent years working in the shadows, moving unseen, unheard. She had never been caught. Not once. But this human, this ordinary human, was looking straight at her. She took a slow breath, calming her racing thoughts. It's just a coincidence, she told herself. Maybe he's looking at something behind me. And then Jack Carter did something that shattered her reality. He spoke. I know you're there. And I know you're watching me. Caliph's breath caught in her throat. She had spent her whole life believing that no one could ever see her. But now, for the first time, someone had not only seen her, but addressed her directly. This was impossible. This was wrong. And she had to find out why. The impossible truth. Caliph's mind raced. He spoke to me. He sees me. No one, not even the most advanced species in the galaxy, had ever been able to detect her kind. The Neuralians had mastered the art of remaining unseen, existing between dimensions, observing civilizations from the shadows. Their power had made them untouchable. Yet here stood a human, staring straight at her with an expression that wasn't shock or confusion, but something far worse, amusement. Jack Carter smirked. His hands rested casually on his belt, as if he had all the time in the universe. He tilted his head slightly, studying her. Caliph remained silent. She didn't dare move, didn't dare acknowledge him. This had to be a trick. A human could not see her. And yet, he did. Jack took a slow step forward. The crowd bustled around him, oblivious. He walked right up to the spot where she stood, his boots clanking against the station floor. He leaned in slightly, his voice low and smooth. You gonna say something, or just stand there breathing in my ear? Caliph's entire body tensed. Her heart pounded in her chest. He hears me too. That was impossible. Her people existed between dimensions. Even if by some miracle he could sense her presence, he shouldn't be able to hear her. This wasn't just strange. This was dangerous. Without thinking, She moved, quick, silent, slipping through the crowd. She phased through a metallic wall, stepping into a restricted maintenance corridor. There was no way he could follow. Yet, as she turned a corner, she heard his voice again. "Running away? That's rude. You didn't even introduce yourself." Caliph spun around so fast she nearly lost balance. No, 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 he cannot follow me. But there he was, Jack Carter, standing in the corridor she had just phased into, without any visible way of getting there. For the first time in her life, Caliph felt a prickle of fear. This human wasn't normal. She narrowed her eyes, forcing herself to regain control. Think logically. He had followed her, yes, but he couldn't have phased through the wall. Maybe he had another way in. Maybe there was a door she hadn't seen. Her training kicked in. Observe, analyze, adapt. She watched him carefully, searching for a trick, a device, a hidden ability. But Jack just stood there, arms crossed, looking entirely at ease. His uniform bore insignia: Commander, United Earth Fleet, a high-ranking officer. Not a scientist, not a psychic, not a telepath. Just a human. Caliph had studied humans for years. They were unpredictable, yes, but never capable of this. How? She finally spoke, her voice cautious, controlled. Jack raised an eyebrow. How what? How do you see me? His smirk widened. He rocked back on his heels, as if enjoying her distress. That's the real question, isn't it? Caliph took a slow step back, assessing him. You're lying. Jack chuckled. If I was lying, you wouldn't be so nervous. Her fingers twitched. She wanted to retreat, to vanish into the void, and pretend this never happened. But she knew she couldn't. Jack Carter had seen her once. That meant he could see her again. And that meant she was compromised. She activated her communicator, hidden within the phase state. A silent signal was sent to her people. A simple message. Threat detected. Possible exposure. Awaiting orders. Jack watched her with an amused look, as if he knew exactly what she was doing. Then he sighed dramatically. You know, I figured something like this might happen. That's why I've been preparing for this moment. Caliph's eyes narrowed. Preparing. Jack reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small silver flask. He unscrewed the top and took a long sip before exhaling. I was wondering when one of you shadow folk would finally talk to me. Caliph froze. One of you? Her mind reeled. Has he seen others? That was impossible. Her kind ensured absolute secrecy. There were no records, no witnesses, no evidence that they even existed. They were ghosts. She stared at him, her voice barely above a whisper. You've seen my kind before. Jack took another sip of his drink and grinned. Oh yeah, you're not the first. Caliph's blood ran cold. Her people had spent centuries hidden, undetected. If Jack Carter had seen them before, it meant something had gone horribly, horribly wrong. Her communicator beeped, an incoming transmission from her superiors. She turned away from Jack for only a second to check it. Mission compromised. Secure the target. Eliminate if necessary. Her grip tightened. Her pulse quickened. She looked back at Jack. He was still smiling. And that was when she realized. He knew what her orders were. He knew she had just been told to deal with him. And yet, he wasn't afraid. He took another sip from his flask and smirked. So, what's it gonna be, Shadow Girl? Are you gonna kill me? Caliph hesitated. For the first time in her life, she wasn't sure. An unwanted discovery. Caliph stood frozen, the weight of her orders pressing down on her like a collapsing star. Secure the target. Eliminate if necessary. Her mission was clear. If a species ever became aware of the Neuralians, it was a direct threat to their existence. Exposure was unacceptable. And this human, Jack Carter, had not only seen her but claimed to have seen others like her before. That was impossible. But here he was, standing in front of her, smug, confident, and utterly fearless. His eyes held no trace of panic, no fear of what was to come. It was as if he had already predicted this moment. Keleth's pulse quickened. She was trained for situations like this, to remain logical and emotionless. But for the first time, doubt crept in. How had he seen her? How had he followed her? How did he know? Jack took another slow sip from his flask, his casual posture a stark contrast to the storm raging inside Keleth's mind. He smirked. "You're thinking about it, aren't you? The easiest way to solve this problem. A quick phase blade to the heart, and poof, no more Jack Carter." Keleth's fingers twitched. "That's exactly what my orders tell me to do." "But you won't." Jack's voice was confident. Her narrowed eyes flickered to his. "And why is that?" Jack shrugged. "Because I can see you. Because I'm not afraid. And because you have questions." Keleth's jaw tightened. He was right, and she hated it. She did have questions. The need to understand this anomaly was outweighing her orders. It was an unfamiliar, unsettling feeling. Her people had spent centuries refining their methods of stealth and secrecy. No species had ever detected them. The moment one did, it was either erased or their memories wiped clean. Yet Jack Carter stood here, untouched, completely at ease, as if he knew he was untouchable. She had to know why. "I don't believe you," she finally said. "You're lying." Jack raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "You said you've seen others like me before." She stepped forward, her body radiating silent intensity. "That's not possible. My people are ghosts. We are whispers in the dark. No one sees us." Jack's smirk faded slightly. He studied her for a long moment before exhaling. "All right. You want to know the truth. Fine." He leaned in slightly, his voice quieter now, his tone serious. "You're right. Most of your people go unnoticed. Most. But every once in a while, something glitches." Keleth's blood ran cold. "Glitches?" Jack nodded. "Your ability isn't perfect, is it? Every now and then, something slips through. A shadow where there shouldn't be one. A faint whisper when no one's around. A reflection that wasn't meant to be there." Keleth felt her breath hitch. "That's not possible. We are flawless." Jack continued. "Most species ignore it. They chalk it up to imagination, a trick of the light. But humans? We're different. We notice things we're not supposed to." Keleth clenched her fists. "That doesn't explain you. You don't just notice. You can see me. You can follow me." Jack smiled. "Yeah, funny thing about that." He paused, as if debating how much to say. Then he sighed. "I wasn't always in the fleet, you know. Before this, I worked on a deep space mining vessel. Small crew, long shifts, lots of time alone in the dark." Keleth listened in silence. "One night, I saw something move, just out of the corner of my eye, a flicker of a figure where there shouldn't have been one." He tapped the side of his head. "I thought I was losing my mind. Then, a few weeks later, I started hearing whispers. Faint, like someone was standing just behind me." Keleth swallowed. This was disturbingly familiar. At first, I ignored it. I told myself it was nothing. But the more I ignored it, the more it happened. And then, Jack trailed off, his expression darkening. Keleth took a step forward, curiosity outweighing her caution. "Then what?" Jack's voice was low. "Then one of them made a mistake." Silence stretched between them. Keleth felt a slow dread creeping over her. A mistake. Her kind didn't make mistakes. Jack took another sip of his drink before continuing. "I was in the engine room, running diagnostics, when I caught something in the reflection of the control panel. A figure. Tall, slender, just like you." He glanced at her, and then it moved. Keleth's breath came slower now. I turned around, and for a split second, it was there, right in front of me. And then, poof, gone. Keleth felt an uncomfortable twist in her stomach. This shouldn't be happening. He shouldn't have seen one of us. We don't make mistakes. Jack leaned against the wall, watching her reaction. I never told anyone. No one would believe me. But after that, I started seeing them more and more. Sometimes just flickers, sometimes whole figures. Like they were watching me, studying me, waiting. Caliph exhaled slowly. If what he was saying was true, then her people had a problem. A serious problem. Jack tilted his head. So now we're here. And you're wondering the same thing I am. Why me? Why can I see you? Why did they let me live? Caliph clenched her jaw. That was the real question. If Jack had been able to detect them for so long, why hadn't they silenced him? Her communicator beeped again. Mission compromised. Immediate extraction required. Secure or terminate target. Caliph's pulse quickened. She had minutes, maybe seconds, before her people acted. She was either bringing Jack with her or leaving him behind in a body bag. Jack saw the change in her expression and smirked. Ah, let me guess. You just got your next set of orders, didn't you? Caliph glared at him. And I'm guessing they're not friendly. Her fingers twitched toward the blade hidden on her belt. She had a choice to make. Follow orders or break protocol. Jack sighed. Tell you what, Shadow Girl, you don't have to decide right now. But when your bosses come knocking, whose side are you gonna be on? Caliph hesitated. And for the first time in her life, she didn't know the answer. A dangerous secret. Caliph stood at the edge of an impossible choice. The command in her communicator was clear. Secure or terminate the target. But Jack Carter was not reacting like a man marked for death. He wasn't pleading, bargaining, or preparing for a fight. He simply stood there, casually taking another sip from his flask, as if this was just another boring conversation in a long day. The sheer audacity of it sent a ripple of unease through Caliph's core. Most species, upon learning of the Neuralians, reacted with fear or disbelief. Even the most advanced civilizations couldn't comprehend the idea of beings that existed just beyond their perception. But Jack Carter was different. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't even mildly unnerved. And that was dangerous. Caliph inhaled slowly, controlling her emotions. You don't seem concerned about what happens next. Jack raised an eyebrow. Should I be? Her fingers twitched. Yes, you should. You don't seem to understand the gravity of this situation, she said, voice low and even. Your knowledge of me, of my kind, is a threat. Jack let out a short chuckle. A threat to who? You? Or the people pulling your strings? Caliph's jaw tightened. Jack took a step forward, unhurried. I get it. You've got orders. Some faceless authority tells you what to do, and you do it. No questions asked. That's how you've survived, right? Caliph didn't answer. But let me ask you something, Shadow Girl. If your people are so sure no one can see them, why do they have a plan in place for when someone does? That question hit harder than Caliph expected. Her orders, the protocols drilled into her since childhood, were meant for impossible scenarios. The Neuralians were never supposed to be seen. And yet there was an entire contingency plan for the moment they were. Why? Jack watched her reaction closely. I think your people have been caught before. Caliph's blood ran cold. No. I think they've covered it up. Erased the evidence. Killed off anyone who got too close. That's not true. But the words felt hollow. Jack smirked, tapping the side of his head. Then why am I still alive? Caliph felt her pulse quicken. He was right. If her people knew about these glitches in their stealth ability, why hadn't Jack already been eliminated? If he had truly seen others before, why hadn't her superiors wiped him out long ago? Something was wrong. And she hated not knowing what. Caliph's communicator beeped again. A new message. Extraction team inbound. 3 minutes. Her stomach twisted. 3 minutes. Jack exhaled sharply. Let me guess. That wasn't a dinner invitation. Caliph remained silent. She glanced around, scanning for exits, recalculating her options. Jack noticed. "You don't want to take me in." Caliph finally looked at him. "I don't want to kill you either." Jack grinned. "Good, because I wasn't planning to die today." The hidden war begins. Caliph had 3 minutes before her people arrived. 3 minutes to decide what Jack Carter was to her: a prisoner, an enemy, or an ally. Her instincts screamed at her to follow orders, to detain him and deliver him to her superiors. That was her training. That was the protocol. But Jack was right about one thing. If she handed him over, she wouldn't get the answers she needed. Because if her people had let this anomaly go unchecked for this long, it meant they were hiding something from her. Caliph's gut churned at the realization. This wasn't about Jack anymore. It was about the cracks in the system she had believed in her entire life. 2 minutes. Jack watched her with calm patience, as if he could see the war raging inside her. Then he shrugged. "I'll make this easy for you." And before she could react, he ran. Caliph blinked in stunned silence before instinct took over. Damn it. She sprinted after him. Jack wasn't just running for his life. He was running like a man who knew exactly how to escape. He weaved through the narrow maintenance corridors of the station, slipping through security gaps and bypassing access locks with shocking efficiency. How does he know this station so well? Caliph phased through the walls, cutting off his escape routes, but Jack adapted instantly. He changed direction, doubled back, even used the crowd in the main docking area to obscure his movements. She gritted her teeth. "Carter, stop." Jack shot her a smirk over his shoulder. "You're gonna have to work for it, Shadow Girl." 1 minute. Caliph pushed harder, closing the gap between them. If he got to the lower decks, he could lose her entirely. Jack skidded around a corner, aiming for a small cargo bay, when suddenly, the station's security alarm blared to life. Caliph's blood ran cold. The extraction team was here. A voice rang out over the intercom. "Unidentified anomaly detected. All personnel, clear the area." Caliph saw them before Jack did. 2 heavily armed Niralian operatives, phasing into visibility at the docking bay entrance. Jack's cocky smirk vanished. Well, shit. Caliph's heart pounded. I have to make a choice. Now. Jack turned to run, and she grabbed his arm, pulling him into the shadows. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed. Caliph forced him against the wall, eyes blazing. "You don't understand. If they catch you, you don't just disappear. You stop existing." Jack's gaze locked onto hers. "Then I guess that means you just made your choice." Caliph inhaled sharply. She had. Because right now, she wasn't standing beside her own people. She was helping the one man she was supposed to erase. The moment stretched between them. Then Jack grinned. "So, what's the plan, Shadow Girl?" Caliph's grip tightened. "We run." And together, they vanished into the chaos. The hidden war. The station was descending into chaos. The alarms screamed through the corridors, flashing red lights casting eerie shadows on the walls. Automated announcements repeated over and over. "Security breach detected. All personnel evacuate immediately." This is not a drill. Caliph's grip on Jack's arm was firm as she dragged him through the service tunnels, moving faster than she ever had before. She could feel her own heart pounding, the weight of her choice settling in her bones. She had betrayed her own people. There's no turning back now. Jack wasn't resisting. He was keeping pace with her, his breath steady despite the high-speed chase. Caliph didn't know whether that was impressive or concerning. He glanced at her with a smirk. "So, just to be clear, you're officially committing treason right now." Caliph shot him a glare. "Shut up and move." Jack chuckled but obeyed, following her through a side passage that led them into the lower levels of the station. They were heading toward the maintenance decks, one of the few places not heavily monitored by security. She could feel the pulse of her communicator against her wrist, vibrating with incoming messages. Her team was looking for her. She ignored them. They emerged into a dimly lit chamber lined with exposed pipes and flickering control panels. It smelled of burning coolant and machine oil, one of the many forgotten parts of the station. Jack exhaled, leaning against a railing. "All right, let's take a second. Who's after us?" Calith narrowed her eyes, scanning their surroundings for any signs of pursuit. "They're called phantom units, specialized operatives trained to erase threats like you." Jack raised an eyebrow. "And let me guess, they don't do arrests." She shook her head. "They don't leave bodies." Jack whistled. "Great. Love that for me." Calith exhaled sharply. "They'll be coming soon. We need to get off this station." Jack tilted his head. "You got a ship?" She hesitated. Her personal exfiltration craft was locked in a restricted bay, one she no longer had access to. Even if she reached it, her clearance would already be revoked. Jack noticed her silence and grinned. "I'll take that as a no." Calith crossed her arms. "Do you?" Jack chuckled. "I like you, Shadow Girl, but you're not great at hiding when you're screwed." She clenched her jaw, ignoring the urge to punch him. He wasn't wrong. Jack rubbed his chin. "All right. Lucky for you, I happen to know a guy." Calith's eyes narrowed. "A guy?" Jack grinned. "A pilot. Runs an independent transport business." Calith stared at him. "You mean a smuggler?" Jack winked. "I mean a very resourceful individual with flexible morals." Calith exhaled, considering their options. The phantom units would find them within minutes. Staying here was suicide. Her own ship was compromised. If this pilot of Jack's was real, then it was their only chance. She nodded. "Where is he?" Jack pushed off the railing. "Docking Bay 27. But there's a small problem." Calith rolled her eyes. "Of course there is." Jack grinned. "He hates me." She sighed, rubbing her temples. "I should have killed you when I had the chance." Jack patted her shoulder. "Too late for regrets now. Let's go." The pursuit begins. They moved fast, weaving through abandoned maintenance corridors and back routes to avoid the main security zones. Calith kept checking for signs of the phantom units, but so far, they hadn't been detected. Jack, however, was watching her carefully. "You still haven't answered my question," he said. Calith frowned. "What question?" Jack kept his voice casual. "Why do you choose to help me?" Calith tensed slightly. "I didn't have a choice." Jack smirked. "That's a lie." She exhaled sharply. Damn it. He wasn't wrong. She had chosen this path. She had gone against everything she was trained to do. But she didn't fully understand why yet. So she settled for half the truth. "I need answers." Jack raised an eyebrow. "About me. About why you can see me. Why my people let you live. Why we have a protocol for something that should never happen." Jack's smirk faded slightly. He nodded. "Fair enough." They kept moving, silent but focused. Finally, they'd reached Docking Bay 27. Calith scanned the area. The bay was mostly deserted. Just a few workers loading cargo. In the far corner, a rusted freighter sat docked, its engines humming faintly. Jack grinned. "There she is. The Black Thorn. Not much to look at, but she flies." Calith glanced at him. "And the pilot?" Jack sighed. "That's the real challenge." He approached the ship's loading ramp and knocked loudly. After a few seconds, a gruff voice came through the speaker. "Go away, Carter." Jack grinned. "Come on, Soren. Don't be like that." A pause. Then the door hissed open. Standing in the entrance was a rugged-looking man with cybernetic implants running up his arms. His face was lined with years of experience and irritation. Soren crossed his arms. "I should shoot you right now." Jack clapped him on the shoulder. "I missed you too, buddy." Soren scowled. "What do you want?" Jack gestured to Calith. "Transport for 2. Fast. No questions asked." Soren looked at Calith, eyes narrowing. His implants flickered, scanning her. "Who the hell is this?" Calith remained still. She could already tell Soren was dangerous, not in a brute force way, but in a he-knows-too-much kind of way. Jack sighed. Let's just say she's got a whole army looking for her, and if we don't leave now, we'll all be vaporized. Soren raised an eyebrow. And that's my problem because... Jack grinned. Because you owe me. Soren stared at him. Jack stared back. Calith crossed her arms. This is ridiculous. Finally, Soren sighed. You are the worst mistake of my life, Carter. Jack patted his shoulder. Love you too, buddy. Soren turned to Calith. Get on board. If I die because of this, I'm haunting you. Calith exhaled and followed Jack inside. Nowhere left to run. As the freighter took off, Calith watched the station disappear through the viewport. The phantom units had been moments away from catching them. Jack leaned against the console, smiling. Well, that was fun. Calith shot him a look. We barely escaped death. Jack shrugged. Yeah, but we're alive. And now we've got time to figure this all out. Calith hesitated. She had spent her entire life obeying orders. But now, she was on the run with a man who shouldn't exist, heading toward an uncertain future. She turned to Jack. Tell me everything you know about the Neuralians. Jack grinned. Buckle up, Shadow Girl. It's a long story. As the ship jumped to hyperspace, Calith knew one thing for certain. She wasn't invisible anymore. The betrayal. The Blackthorn sliced through hyperspace, its engines humming like a restless beast. The outside was nothing but an endless swirl of shifting light, a corridor between realities, but inside the ship, tension thickened like a suffocating fog. Calith sat rigidly in the co-pilot's chair, her fingers curled into fists against the armrests. She had spent years in silence, unseen, untouched. Now, she was sitting in the cockpit of a human smuggler's ship, next to the only man in the universe who could see her. Jack Carter leaned back in his seat, stretching his arms behind his head, completely at ease. So now that we're not running for our lives, you want to tell me what happens next? Calith didn't answer, because she didn't know. Her whole life had been dictated by orders, by the strict structure of her people's covert operations. There had never been a next step outside of the mission. And now, she was in uncharted territory. Jack studied her silence. You're thinking about going back, aren't you? Calith's gaze flicked to him sharply. Why would I do that? Jack smirked. Because you don't break rules. You've been conditioned to follow orders your whole life, and now, suddenly, you've gone rogue. That kind of thing messes with a person. Calith clenched her jaw. He wasn't wrong. The communicator strapped to her wrist had been silent since they left the station. Not a single message, not a single order. That wasn't normal. If she was truly considered a traitor, there would be a kill order already issued for her. Phantom units would be tracking them. Her ship's location would have been tagged the moment they entered hyperspace. And yet, nothing. Jack tapped the side of his flask, watching her. So, tell me, Shadow Girl, why do I get the feeling that your own people aren't chasing us as hard as they should be? Calith inhaled slowly. Because something doesn't add up. Jack grinned. See, I knew you were smart. She shot him a glare. Jack held up his hands in surrender. All right. So what's the plan? You want to lay low. Find answers. Declare war on your own people. Calith ignored the sarcasm and focused on what she did know. Her people weren't hunting her down immediately. That meant she wasn't an immediate threat. Jack was still alive. That meant he was more valuable to them breathing than dead. Someone was manipulating the situation from the shadows. Calith's stomach twisted. Her entire life, she had believed the Neuralians were in control, that their secrecy was absolute. But Jack had proven otherwise. And if there were more like him, other humans who had glimpsed beyond the veil, then something much bigger was happening behind the scenes. She turned to Jack. I need to know if you're the only one. Jack frowned. The only one. What? The only human who can see us. Jack exhaled, rubbing his jaw. I don't know. I mean, I've met people who've had weird feelings, like they were being watched, like something was just out of sight, but no one who could actually see you. Calith's mind raced. If Jack was an anomaly, that meant there was something unique about him. But if others like him existed, it meant the Neuralians had been failing at their secrecy for a long time. Both possibilities were terrifying. Soren, the pilot, walked into the cockpit, arms crossed. All right, what's the deal? Calith glanced at him. What deal? Soren scoffed. You two show up on my ship, nearly get me killed, and now I'm hauling ass to who knows where with zero explanation. I want to know what I'm getting paid for. Jack grinned. The thrill of adventure. Soren glared. Try again. Calith sighed. Where are we now? Soren walked to the control panel, flipping a few switches. We're 2 hours out from an old trade hub. Neutral territory. No big factions, no questions asked. But after that, I'm dumping you both. Calith nodded. That would work. She turned back to Jack. Once we land, I need you to start talking to people. Ask around. See if anyone else has ever seen something like me. Jack smirked. And what will you be doing? Calith exhaled, her fingers tapping absently against her wrist. I need to make contact with someone. Jack raised an eyebrow. Someone from your side. Calith hesitated, then nodded. Jack sighed. All right, but if you're planning to betray me, I'd appreciate a warning in advance. Calith didn't respond, because the truth was, she wasn't sure what she was about to do. The revelation. 2 hours later, the Blackthorn docked in the underbelly of a massive, rusted trade station. The place was old, built before the wars, before the alliances, before the galaxy had turned into a chessboard of political maneuvering. It was the perfect place to hide. As they stepped onto the station's main deck, Calith split off from Jack and Soren. She pulled her hood over her head, adjusting the phase tint on her wristband, allowing herself to blend in. She needed information. She needed answers. She found a quiet corner in an abandoned section of the station and activated her communicator. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, Agent Calith, we were wondering when you'd contact us. A cold voice echoed in her earpiece. She recognized it immediately. Her handler. Calith inhaled slowly. Why am I not dead? There was a pause. Then, because you're still useful. Calith's stomach clenched. So this was all planned. Another pause. Not everything. But your reaction was expected. Calith's fingers curled into fists. They knew I would defect. She forced her voice to remain steady. What do you want from me? The voice on the other end was calm. Continue to observe the human, gain his trust, and when the time comes, deliver him to us. Calith's breath hitched. They wanted Jack. Her gaze flicked toward the crowd, searching for him. He was somewhere in the station, laughing, talking, completely unaware that the only reason he was still alive was because he was part of a much bigger game. The communicator beeped again. Do not fail us, Calith. Then the line went dead. Calith slowly lowered her hand, exhaling shakily. She had known betrayal was coming. She just hadn't realized it would be hers. She looked back toward where Jack had disappeared into the crowd. And for the first time, she wondered, was she protecting him, or leading him straight into a trap? The Great Escape. Calith stood frozen in the shadow of the abandoned trade station corridor, the weight of her mission pressing down on her like a collapsing star. Continue to observe the human, gain his trust, and when the time comes, deliver him to us. Her handler's words echoed in her mind. They had been watching her from the start. Every decision, every hesitation, every moment of doubt, they had accounted for it. Her escape with Jack. Predicted. Her refusal to kill them. Expected. Her reaching out to them now. Inevitable. She was never in control. Calith clenched her jaw, her fingers tightening into fists. Her people had never intended to eliminate Jack Carter outright. No, they wanted him alive, for something far worse. She didn't know what they planned to do with him. But if there was one thing she did know about her kind, it was this. No one they took ever came back. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't a mission anymore. It was a game of survival. And she had just realized she was on the wrong side. Meanwhile, the human problem. Jack Carter had no idea he was walking straight into a trap. As he strolled through the dimly lit market district of the trade station, he was more focused on keeping his wallet from getting stolen than worrying about intergalactic conspiracies. The place was a mess. Smugglers, traders, mercenaries. It was a paradise for people who didn't like rules. Jack adjusted his jacket, scanning the crowd. He had taken Calith's request seriously. If other humans could see Nirelians, he needed to find them. The problem was, humans weren't exactly known for noticing things they weren't supposed to notice. Jack had spent years catching glimpses of beings he couldn't explain. Whispers in the dark, flickers of movement just outside his vision. Most people ignored them, but Jack, he had learned to trust his instincts. And right now, those instincts were screaming that he was being watched. He casually adjusted his wrist comm, tapping into the station's security feed. Years in the fleet had taught him how to bypass basic systems. Nothing fancy, just enough to get a live scan of his surroundings. A red blip appeared behind him. Someone was following him. Jack smirked. Knew it. He didn't turn around. Instead, he kept walking, casually weaving through the crowd, making his way toward a quieter section of the station. Then, in one smooth motion, he ducked into an alley, spun around, and pulled his pistol free. All right, Shadow Boy, let's talk. A figure stepped into the dim light. A human man. Scruffy, with sharp eyes that flickered with something unusual. Jack frowned. He didn't look like an Nirelian, but something about him felt off. The man smirked. Well, you're not as dumb as you look. Jack's grip on his pistol tightened. Who the hell are you? The man tilted his head. You're the one asking around about the unseen, aren't you? Jack's eyes narrowed. Maybe. The man chuckled. Then I guess that means you've seen them too. Jack's heart skipped. He knows. This wasn't just some random trader. He was someone like Jack. Someone who had seen the hidden world lurking beneath reality. But before Jack could respond, a new voice cut through the alley. Carter, move. Jack barely had time to react before Calith slammed into him, shoving him aside as gunfire ripped through the air. Ambush. The walls behind them exploded in a shower of sparks. Calith yanked Jack to his feet, dragging him behind cover. Jack blinked. Okay, what the hell? Calith's voice was sharp. It's a trap. We have to get out of here now. Jack peeked over the crates and saw them. Phantom units. His stomach dropped. They weren't here to negotiate. Calith fired off a shot, hitting one of the attackers dead center. He staggered but didn't go down. His armor absorbed most of the impact. Jack swore under his breath. I thought we were done running. Calith pulled him forward. Run now, complain later. The market district exploded into chaos. The phantom units weren't using standard weapons. They were using phase disruptors, designed to neutralize targets that weren't entirely in this reality. Jack realized what that meant. They weren't just here for him. They were here for Calith too. Something had changed. Her people weren't just interested in studying him anymore. They wanted to erase them both. Jack grabbed Calith's wrist, pulling her in another direction. Docking bay. Now. She didn't argue. They sprinted through the marketplace, ducking behind stalls, weaving through the panicked crowd. Security drones tried to intervene, but the phantom units tore through them like paper. Calith reached her communicator, her voice sharp. Soren, get the ship ready, now. Soren's irritated voice crackled through. I knew you two were bad luck. Fine. Get your asses back here before I take off without you. Jack and Calith raced through the winding corridors, the phantom units closing in fast. A blast hit the ground near Jack's feet, sending him stumbling forward. Caliph caught him, yanking him back up as they burst into docking bay 27. The Blackthorn's engines were already powered up, its cargo ramp open. Soren stood at the top, waving frantically. "Move it, move it, move it." Jack shoved Caliph forward. "Go, I'll cover you." Caliph hesitated for only a second, then she ran. Jack turned, raising his pistol. He fired 3 quick shots, forcing the phantom units to dive for cover. Then he sprinted up the ramp, barely making it inside before the hatch sealed shut behind him. Final stand. Soren didn't wait. The Blackthorn roared to life, lifting off the docking bay floor as station security swarmed in. Too late to stop them. Caliph slumped against the wall, breathing heavily. Jack fell beside her, chest rising and falling as he let out a short laugh. They had made it. But Caliph knew it wasn't over. She turned to Jack, her voice low. "They wanted you alive, Carter. But now, they tried to kill us both." Jack frowned, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Yeah, I noticed that part." Caliph's gaze was sharp. "That means something changed. They're afraid of us now." Jack smirked. "Good. I like being a problem." Caliph didn't smile. She had betrayed her people. There was no going back. Jack wasn't just an anomaly anymore. He was a threat to everything the Neuralians had built. And for the first time in her life, Caliph realized. So was she. The Blackthorn jumped to hyperspace, leaving the past behind. Whatever came next, they were in it together.